My final
Thank
guest
you.
is Congresswoman Diana DeGette of Colorado. She is the chair of the Energy and Commerce Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee. She also is the co-author, for the purposes of this conversation, the 21st Century Cures Act. She recently introduced Cures 2.0 Act along with her colleague, Republican Congressman Fred Upton of Michigan, as a follow-up measure to speed up the delivery of cures and treatments for rare diseases. I spoke with Representative DeGette a short while ago.
Joining us from her congressional district in Colorado, Representative DeGette, thank you for joining us. I want to begin big picture because you have been immersed in the issue of rare diseases in this country and globally. So just how big of a problem is it and where are the solutions?
Well, of course, rare diseases impact people, millions of people here in the US and around the world. And because they're rare diseases, frequently they don't impact a lot of people. And so it's very difficult to find cures for those diseases. 21st Century Cures that Congressman Fred Upton and I passed in 2016 and was signed into law by President Obama had some provisions to really help us make an impact on finding treatments and cures for rare diseases. And now we're working more to find those cures for faster, even for more people who have rare diseases.
And finding cures where, in terms of the role of NIH, in terms of university hospitals, where is the research being done? And what are some of the big questions that you think need to be answered?
Well, there's research being done at the NIH and also in universities around the country and around the world. But we need to help researchers get access to data better. And that's something that Fred's and my new legislation really focuses in on how we can utilize and get researchers access to data while still protecting privacy for the patients, obviously. But also, one of the provisions in the law that we have is an ability to expand genetic testing, particularly for pediatric patients, because they have had very, very long and involved difficulty getting the information they need to begin to identify these diseases and then to find treatments and cures. So basically, speeding up access to data and then the ability to get the information researchers need to develop treatments.
As you know, Representative, people are living longer. That is the good news, but it's also creating a number of challenges in the healthcare field, especially when it comes to rare diseases or diseases that affect the elderly predominantly, such as Alzheimer's.
Yes, we have a number of tough nuts to crack that we're seeing an alarming increase. Alzheimer's is one, Parkinson's, other brain diseases, rare brain diseases. And in our 21st Century Cures bill, Fred Upton and I put several $1 billion into that type of research, but we still haven't been able to cure it. And so President Biden has really come up with an innovative new idea, ARPA-H, which is modeled on the DARPA model in the Defense Department, where you would put together a team of sort of a lean, mean research machine to take a problem like Alzheimer's, to collect researchers from every sector, and then to put them together to try to find cures for that disease. And Fred Upton and Anna Eshoo, the chair of the Health Subcommittee, and I are working quite closely on language to authorize ARPA-H. We've already got some funding for it in the appropriations bills, but we really think if we could model a very streamlined process, we could make some real progress in these difficult diseases, including, by the way, cancers.
As you know, for anyone who has gone through the process of determining what the illness is, the term diagnostic odyssey, before they finally figure out what is causing that rare illness, that rare disease. Is there anything that can be done to shorten that process? Because any family member, any patient who has gone through that knows how difficult and painful it really can be.
Well, in our new bill, Cures 2.0, Fred and I have several innovations at the Food and Drug Administration that we think will enable people to have much faster diagnoses, and also will help caregivers communicate much better with patients, particularly in vulnerable communities and communities of color. In addition, I have another bill I'm working on with Congressman Larry Bouchon called the VALID Act. And this is a bill that will give us the opportunity, really for the first time, to regulate laboratory-based testing. We've got bipartisan support in both the House and the Senate for all of these bills, ARPA-H, Cures 2.0, and the VALID Act.
And so with all three of these, Congresswoman, what is the structure of that in terms of Washington, NIH, the research component, the federal government, who responds to who? How would all of that work?
Well, so with the VALID Act, this would give the FDA the ability to regulate lab-based tests, just like it does medical devices and drugs and things like that. With Cures 2.0, it's really some revisions within a number of the federal agencies, NIH, but in particular, the FDA and CMS, to try to get funding for new drugs and devices more quickly so that we can get those cures into the hands of the patients. And then with ARPA-H will be a new agency. The Biden administration hopes that it will be housed within the NIH, but it'll be independent from the NIH. And it will be, as I said, a lean, mean research machine.
There's also been some criticism, to be fair, about the approval process when it comes to drugs in the FDA. Does this in any way speed up the process? What do you think could be done to streamline it and make it more efficient and more timely?
Well, my opinion is that we need to have the ability to have drugs reviewed and approved in a timely fashion. But we also need to make sure that the safety and efficacy is there, obviously, for the patients. And so one thing I really think is important, and I've pushed for many years, is post-market review, which is what we've seen with that new Alzheimer's drug that was recently approved by the FDA and others. It's kind of a balance sometimes between making sure that we get new drugs and devices out, particularly for diseases for which we don't have a treatment or cure, but we also want to make sure that they're safe for the patient and that they work. So having that review process is important. Having robust funding at the FDA is important, and also having the FDA and CMS working together. So once a drug or a device is approved, that it can get funded for the patients. That's also critical.
Congresswoman, one of the success stories, and many people point to Moderna, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, working together on Operation Warp Speed, put in place by the previous administration to make sure that we had a vaccine in place for COVID-19. Are there lessons that can be applied to what you're talking about when you have a public-private partnership, NIH, the FDA, universities, and the federal government working for a common goal?
Yes, and in fact, Fred and I are very proud because we believe that some of the provisions of 21st Century Cures gave the FDA the authority to put the process of Operation Warp Speed in place, and then to use the emergency use approval process to get those vaccines reviewed and approved as quickly as possible. And I do want to stress, we always have to make sure that we're not cutting corners on approval, because we want to make sure that the drugs work and that they're safe. But if you have a situation like this, where you're able to bring together teams from the agency itself, from the NIH and the FDA, but also from the pharmaceutical companies and the research universities, to structure clinical tests, to then be able to conduct those clinical tests on a widespread basis, and then to be able to approve on an emergency use basis, then that's why we were able to get these vaccines as quickly as we could. And by the way, in Cures 2.0, Fred and I also have a whole section that will help us target some of the most vulnerable populations for those clinical trials. Because one thing we learned during the COVID clinical trials is it's a lot harder to get those populations, communities of color and low income populations, enrolled in those studies, but yet it's critical to see if those therapies are going to work.
And you have been so involved in this issue during your time in Congress. What are the questions that you have that need to be answered? What concerns you the most moving forward on these pieces of legislation?
Well, what concerns me, I want to make sure that as we figure out how to structure our health research system to respond to so many exciting developments, the mapping of the human genome, the ability to use telemedicine and biometrics and all of that, I want to make sure that we continue to keep the patient at the heart of all of that. So while we're having more and more esoteric and effective treatments, we need to make sure that those treatments really do work for the patients, that the patients understand that, but also critically that they can afford those treatments. Some of the new treatments involve such complex research that once they get to the bedside, they may be very, very expensive. And I think this is something that Congress is really going to have to grapple with as we go forward.
And finally, you literally wrote the House bill when it came to stem cell research. What more can we learn from that?
So way back when we passed the stem cell research bill, and then when President Obama enshrined that into an executive order, it was a bill to allow ethical embryonic stem cell research. And after that happened, and there was a lot of exciting research going on, particularly in the area of diabetes. But after that happened, it sort of faded into the background, and everybody said, oh, well, that's been superseded. We don't need that anymore. And then just a few months ago, Doug Melton at Harvard announced that he had actually finally been able to make cells, islet cells, that produce insulin from embryonic stem cells after all these years. And he thinks that this will cure type 1 diabetes. They're still working on, they've been approved for phase 1 trials, but they're still working on the final approval. But if this happens, it will be a cure for diabetes. So the lesson that teaches me is that policymakers need to give researchers the tools that they need to find cures and the methods that they need to find cures, the funding that we need to do the research, and then we need to step back. We shouldn't be micromanaging, for example, what types of cells researchers use, as long as they're used in an ethical way. We need to trust the scientists, and we need to work hand in hand, realizing we're just policymakers, and the scientists are really the ones finding these cures.
But engaging the tone of your voice, it seems as if you're excited about some potential breakthroughs because of all of this.
Well, let me just say, from a personal basis, my daughter Francesca is a type 1 diabetic who was diagnosed when she was age 4 in 1999, right about the time this whole issue started. That's how I got involved in biomedical research issues to begin with. And so if you have a family member, to go back to what you were saying, if you have a family member with a disease that could actually be cured by research, that makes you personally excited to see this happen.
Diana DeGette represents Colorado's 1st Congressional District. She is joining us from Denver. We appreciate your time and expertise on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve. Great being with you again.
And again, we want to thank the representative providing her perspective, Diana DeGette, Democrat of Colorado. And that brings us an end to our program. A big thank you to Alexion Pharmaceuticals for its support, and to all of you for attendees who had the chance to join us for this discussion. If you missed any of the conversations, we will have the video from this event up on our website shortly. I'm Steve Scully. Have a great weekend.